And I always say whenever there's a recession, there's almost like a leap in terms of the overall, business world in terms of embracing digital. That they get closer to it every time because let's put it this way, and I'm not saying there's not a place for it, but if you're gonna buy a billboard ad in the middle of Times Square, I always say, like how are you gonna measure whether that impacted your bottom line sales versus doing either a digital campaign or even an in-store campaign, that can show direct connection to actual sales.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Exact Digital Podcast. Today, I'm sitting down with Jason So, founder and chief strategist at Strand Consulting, a digital transformation and marketing advisor firm that helps businesses navigate growth, digital strategy, and recession-proof their marketing efforts. Jason has a background in leading global brands like Porsche and Canada's top 3 leading telecom, TELUS. He brings a unique perspective from both the client side and the agency world. Strand Consulting is known for the data-driven approach, high-level advisory work, and the ability to execute with a specialized agile team. In this episode, we'll discuss how businesses can stay adaptable in uncertain economies, the power of data, and why most companies aren't using it correctly, the biggest mistakes agencies make when they're scaling and how to avoid them, and how Strand Consulting structures its unique mercenary-style experts team. Jason, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, Kenzie. Great to be here.
Great to have you. Well, he is in from Canada virtually, so if you hear some phrases you might not know, it's time for you to learn.
I might mix in some British terms as well, because I did spend some time over in England, so that does sneak out occasionally.
Oh, awesome. We like to say
as
multicultural.
North American as possible.
No. See, that's what we're here for. We're trying to get diverse opinions and getting all of their different ideas, so we're not just sticking to our little soapbox over here.
Love it.
Awesome. Well, you've worked with massive global brands like Porsche and TELUS, one of the top 3 Canadian telecom companies, and now you run Strand Consulting. What made you shift from the client side to launching your own agency?
That's a great question, Kenzie. I think, I guess going back, a little background about me, I've got over 20 years, primarily working on the client side and having worked with those big brands. And especially when you work with those big brands, you see all kinds of agencies. We had a big agency roster, everything from international agencies to local freelancers and whatnot. So you kind of see the wide gamut of and different approaches of how these different agencies serve their clients. And so having been on the other side of the table for that time, I really saw, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I always said, okay, I always question, I'm like, well, okay, why are they doing this? Why are they doing this? Or why aren't they doing this? And so we kind of set out to do, provide professional services in the marketing world a slightly different way. I guess in terms of the genesis of Strand Consulting Group, effectively, it was one of those typical things where I was moonlighting, doing some side hustles on side, and at some point, the side hustle demand, increased, and it was rated. And it was one of those things as well. Even though I never really, honestly, identified as an entrepreneur in my early days, I think it starts off with the original .com boom and bust as well, which was in the late 90s, where there was that real entrepreneurial spirit. And I always knew that I always said when I got to a certain point in my life and career, I kind of wanted to take things in a different direction. So that opportunity came up about 7 years ago, and then hence we started off Strand Consulting Group. Originally, it was a content agency, and there were other partners involved. But then they kind of moved on, and they were kind of focused on other areas. Whereas for me, I guess the approach I always think about in terms of what I'm doing and how I'm working with clients is very much a teaching aspect. And so I always found it extremely rewarding working with these executives and sharing my knowledge and experience with them. And so that's how Strand was formed and evolved over time.
Yeah, exactly. So that goes right into my next question. Your model is really unique, and rather than hiring a full in-house team, you've built a highly specialized network of experts. So why did you choose this approach over the traditional agency structure? And can you explain it a little bit for whoever's listening?
Absolutely. There's pros and cons for every type of agency structure. So there's no perfect scenario. It depends on really what works for you and your business and your clients, more importantly. For me, and going back to one of my early experiences when I worked at Porsche, and it was one of those things. Everyone knows Porsche. They think it's a massive, massive brand. It is. It is one of the most well-recognized brands in the world. And I was working in their one of their largest European offices for a number of years. The one thing I learned there, and many people don't know actually, is that Porsche was literally on the verge of bankruptcy in, I'm going to say about the 90s or so. And at the 11th, and it was always family owned, at the 11th hour, they were about to sell the Mercedes actually. 11th hour, they decided, they got financing and decided, no, we're going to keep this a family business. And what they did was, they actually, and this is where I also believe where you can work with experts, they brought in the experts from Toyota, which is a completely different segment. You know, their volume, mass market, if not the biggest manufacturer in the world now, but whole different market compared to a niche boutique brand like Porsche. But what Toyota did was they had this concept in Japan called Kaizen, which is like basically about lean operating. And so they basically brought in the Kaizen consultants and just Kaizen the heck out of the whole business. So they just looked at, and quite frankly, my role at Porsche, and our at the time, we considered our most direct competitor was BMW, but the volume of cars they sold was like multiples of Porsche. But nonetheless, though, at BMW, there'd be 4 people doing my job compared to what I was doing at Porsche. So that's what I learned. It's not about, the number of people, and same with my boss as well. We used to have discussions about hiring more people. It's like, no, it's not about hiring more people. It's like, if you're doing things the same way, that's not going to help you grow and scale properly. You're just going to incur unnecessary overhead costs. So I think with that kind of approach and philosophy in my early career, I always took that into, all my other roles and into how I build my business. So effectively, I guess the easy way to describe our team is like, we're all, effectively almost like a special forces team. Everyone on our team is highly experienced. I believe our most junior person is maybe 7, 8 years of experience. Almost everyone else is 10 years plus. Effectively, also in terms of the point-to-point and day-to-day management of it, it's me. Which has the pros and cons. But that was one of the things I always found frustrating as well, is when I would work with different larger agencies, especially, you have the partner come in, you shake their hand, they take you out for a nice steak dinner, and then you never see them again until it's time for a contract renewal. And then meanwhile, as soon as that contract's signed, it gets passed on to an account manager. And then eventually, a few months later, I've seen it, even with very big agencies, like a part of like big international groups, you're literally given an account intern. It depends on your spend levels and all that ultimately, right? Which I get. You gotta maintain margins themselves, but we always set out to do it a little bit differently. And we always said, okay, we're gonna provide. We're not going after everybody who we're gonna work with. We're gonna provide white glove service all the way through. So no matter who you deal with, it's gonna be experts at the table. Everyone on my team is basically CEO facing. I have no issue putting them in front of any CEO or board to talk about any of the work that we're doing for them.
That's amazing. It's really refreshing to have that level of confidence so that you know that your clients are getting the best results, and being able to lean on other experts and recognize that it's impossible to know everything about everything. So having people that be their life, and that's what they're always focusing on, bringing that all together and using that as a unit is so important.
Absolutely. They're real crafts people, I would say. They really hone their craft in that area. They become experts. They don't go and try to do everything. But what they do, they've been doing it for a year, day in, day out for multiple years. So they know the answers even before the questions are asked oftentimes. So that allows us to move faster. And, I remember there was one a project where we were approached by basically one of the world's largest consulting firms. They actually had, it was Accenture and Accenture Digital, where they gave us a deadline effectively that even their own digital agency and their partners could meet. But we were able to fulfill it just because of the team of experts that we had in our team. And without that team, it wouldn't have been possible. If we had to tow along a bunch of people, have to coach them, etc., we couldn't have moved as fast as we could have.
That's amazing. So you mentioned that many billion-dollar brands are still having outdated or inaccurate data. What are some of the biggest data pitfalls you've seen in companies? And
Oh, yeah, I guess probably
yeah,
in terms of data, it's like 2 things. One is there's so much of it that they don't know what to do. and they're waiting, they're just like buried or drowning in data. And the second part is dirty data. It's never been cleaned. And, like I've seen again, these are multi-billion-dollar companies with massive databases. And the last time they did a cleanse on them was maybe 7, 8 years ago. And the thing with our approach is because we're so data oriented, and when we start doing deep dives into like understanding the client's customers and whatnot, we'll actually look at the actual data within their CRM, the customer relationship management software, and we'll look at the records and we'll start doing segmentation. And you'll have random like descriptions of leads or customers. Like I've seen stuff like in the auto industry, stuff that says like Tony the truck driver or Bob with the brown hair and mustache or something like that, right? Like, and so I think that's one of the big problems with maybe not so much with, well, actually, no, that's not true. It depends on the industry. There are some industries, again, where they're still doing very traditional marketing just because that's just how it's always been, right? It's nobody's fault, but that's just what they're used to. And they haven't developed that kind of digital practice and understanding of data. One of our main credos is measure everything, right? So whether you use all that data or whether you dissect it all is a different story, but at least have all the mechanisms in place to measure everything so that when you do need it, you can pull from it. And then the other thing is make sure that when you are measuring everything, it is set up properly. Because the analogy I use is almost like, you're cooking your Thanksgiving turkey. You're inviting 30 people over to your house. You're going to have that big Norman Rockwell moment. And you're using a thermometer that's like 30 years old that your grandma left to you, and it's not accurate. So, even though you're supposed to pull the bird at about 150 degrees Celsius, I'm not sure what that is in Fahrenheit. Sorry, but nonetheless, 165 is what you want to get to when it's fully cooked. But let's say 150, but your thermometer is wrong. That's a problem. So likewise, in data, what we see is sometimes it's not even set up properly. Yes, it's measuring it. Yes, you're looking at the reports, but is it even set up properly? So we've seen that, especially with some traditional businesses that we work in, and these are organizations that have, the conglomerates, and they'll maybe have like 40, 50 sub companies underneath, and all of them are measuring it wrong.
So what would you say would be a great way to measure it correctly and know that it's being done correctly?
Oh, well, testing. You got, first of all, you got to have the right people to implement it. One of the challenges I see is people will not really take it seriously because, and unfortunately, it's maybe potentially due to ownership or leadership who don't see it as that big a problem because, and I think it's partly because they don't understand it. You'll see this with certain types of leaders who maybe this is their first time in this type of role as well. They're great at what they do. Don't get me wrong. They understand their industry really well. But then when it comes to this kind of specialized knowledge, they kind of tend to overlook it. And so, yeah, you got to make sure, first of all, you have the right people in there to set it up properly, and then you got to test it. And it's not complicated. It's literally like, it's a week of work depending on the situation. But for whatever reason, some people, they're thinking on that big shiny object, or they're thinking about, oh, that big campaign, we got to get that out there. But, at the end of the day, if you're not measuring properly, what's that old expression in the ad industry? We wasted 50% of your budget. The problem is we don't know which 50%, right? Whereas at least if you're measuring it properly, if it's set up properly, at least you will know which 50%. But you're really flying in the dark if you don't have it set up properly.
Right. And also you're losing one of the number one benefits of digital marketing, which is the measurability and also the ability to test certain products and test different ad segments and see what's going to be working for you, or maybe even collecting the data of a certain target group that you didn't know would be the proper target, but turns out it is. There's a lot of surprises that happen when it comes to testing. So it's really important that you have different options and take the time and understand that it's not about just placing out a couple of ads and maybe getting some leads, which can help and can be beneficial, but it's a lot about prep and letting it develop over time and being patient.
Yeah, absolutely. There's and again, there's still a lot of industries and businesses out there who have that set it and forget it mentality. And the old adage of build it and they will come. Well, like now we're in the 2025, and we know for a fact that's not the case. Analogy we used to use for another more traditional business I worked for as well, they used to say, we used to say it's almost like, you're building a brick and mortar store, but literally there's no signs at all on it at all. And there's no signs, no one knows what it is. The windows are like blank. So if you don't have signs and ways to promote it and you don't tell people, they can't come. And also, there's some old colleagues of mine that are in more like the venture capital and kind of like private equity world now. And they've said to me in the past, you know what, Jason, I get approached every day by dozens of companies. And I'll never forget what he said. He said, at the end of the day, if they don't have a commercial approach, they're just toys. Right? If they're not thinking about, a lot of people, there's a lot of founders out there, a lot of great ideas, but really it's all about execution. And it's about how you're going to take it to market, how you're going to make it, commercial and actually generate revenue out of it. And so I think a lot of times people forget that part of the business. Yes, you can have a great idea and whatnot, but does anyone want it? And that's probably the biggest thing you should look at in terms of business success.
Right.
And, if you don't know, there are tools that you can use to find out the viability of it. And there's different, to your point as well, Kenzie, run experiments, run tests to validate, the people you're targeting, whether the messaging you're using is right, whether the positioning is right, whether the right visuals or the right brand is being expressed properly.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many stories out there about campaigns and digital marketing that has taken a turn that you weren't expecting, but it was the most successful turn that it could have been. And you kind of have to roll with that and realize you have to be a little bit flexible in marketing because you have the target, you know who you're going for. But if that's not what tests well and it's something else, you just have to roll with it and you have to develop a strategy with that and then maybe rework the other target market and you can maybe test that again. But whatever's working is working.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and don't get me wrong, data doesn't have all the answers, but I always believe it can make you keep you from making a very costly mistake. One term that I heard recently, I didn't coin it, but, I use it a lot, is called informed intuition. It's about where within a business, there's a lot of intuition. There's a lot of anecdotes. We hear it all the time in terms of, hey, I've been working in this industry 15, 20 years, 25, 30 years. I know my customer. Well, yeah, that's great. You probably do. But is there some data that we can glean and some insight that actually supports that? Or is it that actually we always thought about, our ICP, ideal customer profile, is this, but actually doing a deep dive into the data, we realize it's slightly skewed here or maybe slightly different here. So it's one of those things, unfortunately, perception isn't always reality. So, I always like to, a lot of these discussions when I go into with different like strategic leadership teams and CEOs and whatnot, there's a lot of opinions, a lot of subjective ideas, a lot of anecdotes from the industry and from within the business. Our goal is always to basically objectify the subjective. So how do we make it objective so it's not just one person's opinion? How do we make it objective so it's not just based on the last deal a salesperson talked to, because there's that recency effect. We're all biased. There's also bias towards negative stories. So it's like they had one bad experience, the sales team had one bad experience. Oh my God, everyone's like that. Let's not touch that type of profile. Let's not touch that type of customer. Well, hold on. How often has that actually occurred? Is it an outlier or is it an actual trend? So what we're looking for is, forget about these like ones and twos and occasional happenings. Let's look at what's actually happening all the time and more often than not, like the 80-20 rule.
Right. And not to mention, everything is always changing. So, for example, there's certain things that weren't good to put on a meta ad, but now they've increased their targeting and it's much more detailed. So it might be the best option for you. So being able to adapt, learn, and trust the experts.
Yes.
And have that conversation of, okay, well, I've been doing this for 20 years, but meta didn't exist when I first started. So maybe let's think about this.
Absolutely. And you touched upon a point as well in terms of the algorithms. They're changing all the time. When I used to teach SEO years ago, in the earlier days of SEO for the Google algorithm, Google used to come up with algorithm change maybe, I don't know, once a quarter, a few times a year. Now it's almost every week, right? So every week is different from last week. And I had a client ask me recently, just actually last week about, some keyword research we did. I'm like, well, yeah, we could provide it to you again, but actually this was done 2.5 years ago. So yeah, there's still some relevancy. In fairness, for their type of business, because it's very niche, it probably hasn't changed that much because it's traditional business. But that's not always the case, especially if you're moving into more newer industries, anything related to tech. It changes almost at the speed of thought, as we know, right? So you can't just assume what you did 2 years ago or even a year ago or 6 months ago is relevant today, because your consumer is changing all the time as well.
Right. And, it's important as marketers to look at ourselves as humans and what makes us tick, what makes us interact. Our opinions of things are constantly changing.
Absolutely. Yeah, in terms of human, that's a good point, Kenzie. And again, we'll always, whenever we're trying to, going back to objectify the subjective, our ideal process is not just to look at quantitative data. We want to look at qualitative data. So let's actually talk to the humans who are making the decisions. Who are they? And is it only one person that's making the decision? Or is there, someone else like a deal influencer? Because oftentimes in terms of that hierarchy, yes, there's that top level decision maker who's signing off the check, but they're relying on the deal influencer to go do the research and inform and educate, and or maybe just see if the decision maker, there's information that validates the decision maker's direction, right? So how do you kind of like tie that all in together, and how do you use quantitative data to further validate it and show that, okay, it's not just a small sample size, it's actually relevant across hundreds of data points or thousands potentially.
Right, exactly. And, speaking of changing and uncertainty, with businesses facing economic uncertainty, how should they be using data and insights to make better decisions for marketing?
Oh, that's a great question, Kenzie. I love this question, partly because I've been through about 3 recessions, if you count the pandemic. So the dot-com bubble burst, the '08 financial crisis, the pandemic, if you want to call it that. So maybe 2.5, then let's just say, and another one looming, whether that happens or not as well. But regardless of it's officially a recession, it's more the mindset and the approach of different companies and how they're using marketing and advertising. And so in terms of data, the common trend, I would say the most common thing is there's a few things that companies are gonna like pause or cut right away. And unfortunately, marketing is one of those ones that's always scrutinized. They're not gonna get rid of all marketing, but what they're gonna do is always look for stuff that where you can show a clear path to ROI. So if there's not a clear path to return on investment, if you can't show that line connecting it to actual invoices, not just like page views or clicks or any kind of vanity metrics as we call them, we want to look at it all the way through the sales funnel, right? If you're not able to show that connection to it and how you're adding value to the business, usually that's scrutinized quite quickly. And I always say whenever there's a recession, there's almost like a leap in terms of the overall business world in terms of embracing digital, that they get closer to it every time. Because let's put it this way, like and I'm not saying there's not a place for it, but if you're going to buy a billboard ad in the middle of Times Square, I always say, like, how are you going to measure whether that impacted your bottom line sales versus doing either a digital campaign or even an in-store campaign, that can show direct connection to actual sales, right? If you're a B2C company. And likewise with a B2B company as well. A lot of times they'll do a lot of brand advertising. And again, I'm not saying it's not relevant, but during these tough times and recessionary times, that's one of the things that they'll look at very, very toughly, because that's a long-term play. That's brand building, that's brand awareness. You do need it, absolutely. But usually in these tough times, they're going to be looking at more transactional kinds of things, and they'll be looking at more direct ROI in terms of how it's benefiting the business bottom line. So
That's some really good advice. Absolutely. So, like we mentioned just a few minutes ago, that one of the benefits of digital marketing is that ability to track it. And if you can fully show the journey of launch, optimization, retargeting down to conversions, and being able to prove that, you will solidify your position. Because, we all saw during COVID, that was our only way to connect. And that is truly when I saw the influencer world explode. and people were increasing their online behaviors. And that's where you got to put your business out there. And if you didn't have that set up, then maybe potentially you fell behind. And it just shows the power of it. I think sometimes we forget, but I mean, we always know. We're trying to tell them, you know?
Absolutely. And like anything, like it takes a few times, and yeah, it's one of those things where it's just an evolution of an industry. The thing about marketing and advertising is that everyone's got an opinion, let's be honest, because it's still public. So anyone from even, your grandparents have an opinion about advertising and marketing. And so everyone thinks it's really easy to do, which, yeah, you can do it. And there's one thing that another kind of term that we coined here is called effective efficiency. So this is more about, people talk about being efficient, but, we always question, is it actually effective? Is it actually delivering the business outcomes that you're looking for? Is it generating, again, getting you down to not just talking about marketing speak, because especially when you're working with executive and business leaders, they don't understand marketing. All they care about is really revenue, right? And how is it impacting that? And so is it effective in terms of what you're doing, not just being efficient?
Right. And also, it's our job to help them understand, because I couldn't go in their position and take their job and see and know everything that they know about their expertise. So I wouldn't expect them to know how important this is and how marketing works. So it's your job to guide them through that by speaking in their language.
100%. Yeah, definitely. And then what I find as well, having worked on the client side and with big internal teams and big internal agencies, we oftentimes we got caught up in our own, marketing metrics and just really splitting hairs. But at the C-suite level and SLT strategic leadership team level, they're really concerned about, like qualified leads, not just general leads. These are people who are like, and when I say qualified leads, because everyone has a different definition of them, these are hand raisers that are literally saying, I want to speak to sales. Not just people who are downloading a white paper or a case study. Yeah, those are indicators that they may be interested. But, for us, we're always looking at those are the real hot leads. Those are the ones we're concerned about most. And then we'll start looking at the more kind of like warm leads afterwards, right? But the priority for us is always hot leads. And how do, the C-suite is always looking at those, because they want to build a predictable revenue program where they can say, okay, well, we know what our average conversion rate is in terms of these hot leads. And so we know, let's say, industry average 1 in 4 or something like that. We're hitting that industry average. Okay, we need to top up a bit more here in terms of these hot leads. How are we going to do that in the fastest way possible?
Absolutely. And I don't think we can talk about evolution and change without mentioning the elephant in the room, Mr. AI. So
Absolutely. Definitely, we could. It's a hot word
so
where
what'd you say? Sorry?
it's a hot buzzword. Well, not buzzword. It is a thing. It is a
It's the
thing.
thing.
It is the thing. Yeah, absolutely. There's not a day. Literally, the call before this, same thing as well. Like talking about AI and almost every day, like you as well, I'm sure.
Always, absolutely. And it changes even more than marketing changes. It's like almost every single day there's something new. So it's obviously changing the landscape, but you've said that data is still king. How do you see AI enhancing marketing efforts rather than replacing strategic decision making?
Well, it's already doing some of it, and even in our own practice, we're using it, right? Whereas before, we'd have to do things very manually, in terms of like analyzing data or even some of our modeling. Now it's putting into a AI model and prompting it and seeing what it spits out. The thing that we always warn everybody, including ourselves, whether prospective clients or internal teams, is that make sure you validate it, because AI does only not all, but a lot of the ones, the more common ones, are just scraping what's publicly available, right? So if it's an area, or if it's an area like or an industry where it's quite niche, where they're not very online, they haven't talked about a lot. And in other words, what I mean is like industry publications, there's not a lot there. If there's some industries where there's, like frankly, not a lot of content, no one's blogging about it, or if they're doing, all they're doing is regurgitating like fact sheets and like product fact sheets and brochures. There's not a lot of depth to it, right? So you do have to be careful with that. But in terms of how data and AI intersect, it's going to take away a lot of that manual labor. So if you're like, say, going back to what I said before about qualitative data, if you went and interviewed a bunch of people, Typically, that'll take, when we used to do it in-house, and we still do it. But if we were to do it manually, it'll take days just to summarize all that data and kind of like, understand what the insights are. Whereas now you can just upload that raw data and say, okay, summarize this for me. However, though, I'm still wary about how advanced these models are. So I'll always double check it and cross-reference it to make sure it's accurate. Because, we want to make sure that anything we're representing, especially this will lead, whenever we've done qualitative research, the feedback from the clients has always been, quote unquote, game changer, right?
Absolutely.
It's an eye opener for them. So we want to make sure whatever we're summarizing is actually accurate and representative, not just trust the AI model. But that's some of the ways that AI is helping with analyzing data, that, at least in our practice, many, many other ways in addition to that.
Right. And as long as you're putting in your own data and, like you said, cross-referencing it, I think it's super efficient because there's certain things that just used to take so much more time. For example, I will create proposals and I'm writing it out and it's like a word blob of all this information. And I'm like, oh, I want to tighten this up, but that's going to take me some time. And instead I'm like, ooh, hey, ChatGPT, will you button this up for me? Perfectly lines it out. Of course, I'll go and cross-reference it and make sure everything is set up properly, but it keeps you from having to sit there and organize, which is so time consuming.
Absolutely. I think, and one of the things I believe as well, and we're seeing it already is, and we get asked this question as well, I'm sure you, in terms of, the future AI, how is it going to replace, who's it going to replace? It gets, like you said, it's getting better every day. AI doesn't sleep. Humans need sleep, humans need rest, humans are, I can't keep going nonstop. You can't beat AI in that regard. I think in terms of where the future and the near future, not even that far away, it's going to take away, the lower quality performance, I think. So let's use, you talked a bit about copywriting there. If you're not a very good copywriter, well, yeah, AI can replace you. But what it can't replace, at least right now, is the expertise. Because you need an expert to still plug into the model and tell it what good looks like. If you don't know what awesome looks like, yeah, AI can take it to do it to a certain extent, but not always. And I actually had a chat with a old colleague last week, very interesting. And he was talking about, I was just saying, oh, he's very active on LinkedIn. He's very big in the product management world, even internationally now. And he's quite well known for his posts on LinkedIn, and he gets a lot of engagement. And he said, I asked him if he was using AI to do it. He's like, no, it takes a lot of, because he was saying to me, oh, it takes a lot of time. I try to do at least one good solid post per week. And I'm like, doesn't AI help? He's like, you know what? I actually tried. He's like, I did it. I ran an experiment for about 3 months. And I noticed all the metrics were down. So all the core engagement metrics in terms of views, in terms of likes, comments, everything just dropped off a cliff. And then I remember he actually posted on one of his posts after 3 months, hey guys, if you notice anything different, it's because I was using AI. And people would actually write in the comments, yeah, I noticed it wasn't as good as it was before. So it's still not perfect, right? And so,
Right.
this is a guy who's loves technology, loves SaaS. He's, big on product-led growth and everything. And that's a perfect example of how you still need that expertise. And likewise with me in my own practice, I have one client who, we recommended they hire an experienced copywriter. They went and hired someone very junior who is very inexperienced, kind of fresh out of university. Effectively, I was rewriting these very long blog articles because I could tell it was being written by AI. Mind you, they were using ChatGPT, the free version. If they used the paid version, or if they used probably a more specific writing AI tool, it would have been worlds better. But nonetheless, though, I think if you don't really know what awesome looks like, it's hard for you to tell AI what awesome is, and it doesn't know yet, right?
Right.
So
And you
that's
can
why
tell on LinkedIn
yeah.
when most of the time when people are posting, especially if you see that rocket emoji, everybody.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the similar format, isn't there? There's tons of emojis. All this energy is written by AI.
It's so bad. But, you know, it's good in theory to say, hey, I want to have it help me post on LinkedIn. But I actually had a very similar experience. When it's authentic, it's like humans know. Like we can tell, even if we don't think we can tell, it's like our subconscious brain is more connected to somebody that you can tell just blurbed it down on the post rather than went into ChatGPT, told it to make it perfect. And I mean, a lot of influencers say the same thing. Like the video that went viral for them was the one that they didn't even mean to post.
Yeah.
So
You hear that a lot. So yeah, and I wonder also in terms of the algorithms, if they probably have AI detection tools as well,
I'm
right?
sure,
So
actually.
that it could be that also the algorithm is dialing back down the engagement and the views once they detect, like AI written type of copy. So there is quite that possibility. I don't know if that's a fact or not, but it wouldn't surprise me, right? They have the capabilities to do that.
Absolutely. And so, gonna move on to a different thing here. How are you integrating it into your agency? Because I know that you have a lot of experts that you work with. Are they individually putting it into their programs? Are you guys thinking and talking about it together? How is that working for you?
It's a bit of both. As practitioners, we're all using in our areas of expertise. So, an area you're familiar with, our performance marketing strategist, she'll use tools with AI embedded in it. So, and we get this question asked by clients all the time as well. Even during different pitches we've been invited to, a lot of times at how are you using AI, but the analogy I always like to use, and they may not like it always, but I always speak my mind. I always have the slide of showing, and kind of controversial now, but it's a picture of kind of like the AI vision, and it's a person driving an electric vehicle, a Tesla, and they're sleeping behind the wheel, right? And I say this is the vision, and the next slide is it's a Tesla that's busted up because it ran across a train, and the AI didn't see it, right? So it's like, yes, there's a vision, but there's a reality. So you can't let it run your business. And also, it always starts for us about business objectives. What's the outcome you're trying to achieve? And when we say business objective, we get down to the level of, revenue. And we have those discussions very early on because a company that wants to grow 10% year over year, they've been in business for 15 years, is very different from a hyper-growth company that wants to grow 50 to 100% year over year, wants a 10x their revenue, get a $1 billion valuation, et cetera, et cetera. So in terms of, where AI fits into that, it starts with that in terms of how we map out. In terms of the process, yeah, going back to that performance marketing, the tools that we're using have AI embedded into them. So they're learning and improving all the time and finding insights. And same with some of our operational things as well, using some AI tools to like you said as well, some copywriting. We'll use it for even modeling sometimes in terms of financial modeling. Again, we always like to double check to make sure and how it compares to our existing models, how close they are before we publish them and send them out to the client. But it's been a real time saver in terms of efficiency for us. But that doesn't mean that, we're all that does is it frees our time up to kind of think about bigger problems that we can solve for the client, because ultimately we want to solve big problems, right? That's where we can make the biggest impact as an organization for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, out of your different partners, what programmatic tactics do you lean into and you utilize? Like for like ads, maybe like social, SEM, CTV, streaming audio.
Yeah, we don't do much of streaming audio. A lot of it is going to be more on the probably in terms of, and what we found with a lot of our business, and every kind of performance marketing agency is a little bit different in terms of their approach, um, and also in terms of their business, the clients' needs. Most of our clients and our approach is let's go after the low-hanging fruit. And so, and we always say to the client, because we're discussing in terms of different tactics that we use and different tools. And we'll say to them, we'll ask them, okay, so, do you want someone who is, maybe 3 to 6 months out looking for something? Or do you want someone who is ready to buy now? And so we'll really focus on those mid funnel tactics to go after those people first, because usually we find within that, and we're trying to jump ahead here in terms of the levers we can pull to show an immediate impact to the bottom line, that's going to help the most. And there's a lot that you can do there before we start moving up the funnel. So we always prioritize that first. So in terms of, again, going back to your question about, AI will be using that in the Google Keyword Planner. It's powered by AI. That's probably the primary one we use. I once taught with. He considered himself one of the foremost experts in SEO. He was invited internationally to talk at a few different conferences and whatnot. He's quite well respected. I asked him specifically, I said, okay, even between the different keyword tools, what will which one would you use? Would you use SEMrush or Google Keyword, blah, blah? And he said, well, they all pull from Google anyways. So just use Google. That was his thinking, right? So we've always just used that. We've kept it very simple. In terms of programmatic, in terms of display, I've done that in the past. We've done that for some clients, but usually the priority for us is more on it's not sexy, but it's paid search, right? In terms of actually moving the business needle, that's where we can say specifically, okay, these are the terms that came in, and this is what actually drove sales for you. And when you're talking to like CEOs and boards and SLTs, that's what they'll take. And I have one client right now literally going to their investor saying, hey, we did this pilot program for 6 months now or 3 months now. We need more funding because look, this is the amount of leads we're coming through. The sales team have validated it. They've gone through their analytics and said, wow, all the recent closes are all from Google paid search. Bing, different story. Tiny, we don't spend a lot of time or budget on that really. Depends on the industry as well. Sometimes there are some industries and some users that do use Bing, especially when you get into slightly older demographics. If they're using Microsoft machines, they're using the standard, a browser, and then Bing is the default search engine. So that's kind of our focus and our priority. So does that answer your question, Kenzie?
Yeah, perfectly. So, Jason, you've worked with private equity firms, which are extremely ROI driven. How does your experience with these firms shape the way you advise your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's kind of been interesting in the sense that I think our approach always has been suited to private equity firms, and we just happened to start working with them just through some referrals in the industry. Sometimes we call ourselves spreadsheet marketers because we believe that, you got to start first with the data. Again, it doesn't have all the answers, but it can provide directional advice. And then any kind of creative that comes out of that, at least it's in a box. So in terms of, how their approach is in terms of ROI, it's kind of going back to what I was saying before in terms of bottom line. They're looking at not just, like vanity metrics like likes or visits or hits back in the day type of thing. They're looking at invoices, right? Like how does it translate and qualified leads? So hot leads, people who are sales ready, raising their hand saying, yeah, I want to talk to sales now. That's all that they really care about. Also, what they want to see is they want to see a quick return. So in terms of our process, and we've learned through kind of like different ways of doing it, we always got to start with the diagnosis. So we'll go in and the analogy I use is like going to your doctor. If you go to your doctor and just say, hey doc, I've got chest pain, you know what, just cut me open right now and give me a triple coronary bypass. That doesn't work. They got to run a battery of tests. They got to understand your history, all that stuff. Same thing with diagnosis. We have to go through and we have a very methodical process where we go through and analyze all the different channels, all the history, look at their expenditure, and we compare them to like what we've seen in the industry compared to the competitors, what the ratio should be for certain key metrics. And from there, we'll come up with an action plan. And usually, and this is where, going back to what you're asking in terms of ROI and whatnot, they want to see a return in the first 100 days. So within that plan, we'll focus on areas where we can, move the needle the most. And so, like a lot of agencies, and probably like yours as well, Kenzie, we don't try to do everything. We focus only on things that are going to move the needle the most, at least in those first 100 days to get them set up for success. And then we'll continue with them. So the things that, some of the tangible things that we'll actually help out on is first is almost always the digital experience. There's always some issues with it, whether it's in terms of the branding, whether it's design, whether it's conversion optimization. What are those quick things that we can do? We're not going in trying to rebrand it all websites. We believe that we can move faster if we could use existing brands and then really work on conversion optimization in some instances. But in a lot of instances, they may be way off the mark where their messaging is so convoluted, so confusing, and I'm working with them, I don't even understand what they're trying to say, that you got to do a full rebuild. Or it's been one of those sites that they've built maybe 8 years ago and set and forget it, like, oh, we don't need to change it. So we need to update it for them. So we know that if we're able to, within that first 100 days, you know, manage and change the digital experience, and by manage, I mean, we'll actually do it ourselves because we can have the most impact and we can do it the fastest rather than waiting on a third party or internal resources. And then from there, also build up a paid program to start driving qualified leads. We'll have the greatest impact. After that, then, as part of our plan, there's other things that will continue with building up that kind of lead generation and inbound marketing for them.
Right. And, a lot of times when people are coming to you or an agency, they've been burned in the past from someone else. So being able to show them that ROI initially, and then maybe add on some omni-channel approach, get the full funnel going, branding, awareness, will help them trust you and help them grow and feel confident that they can rely on digital advertising.
Absolutely. And the type of companies that we tend to target tend to be, at least from this type of model, the private equity firms, they tend to be more mid-sized companies where they've had a lot of success. A lot of times they're traditional businesses who have done really well over the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and they literally haven't invested enough in sales and marketing. So we're almost like a breath of fresh air trying to tell them how to and work with them to structure it properly in a modern world, but at their scale. And so it's not like we'll come in and say, oh, you got to hire like dozens of people, build an in-house agency. Well, no, we want to effectively help you build a bootstrap marketing team. But what we're going to do is help you focus on things that are going to matter the most, because some of the problems and pains that we often hear is, oh my God, I don't know where to start. There's so many different things. There's so much data, so many channels. I heard, like organic social is the way to go, blah, 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 blah. And, they hear all kinds of things, but we're like, well, let's focus on stuff that's actually going to move the needle. All that other stuff is kind of gravy on top afterwards. And we can do that later, but let's prioritize in terms of getting you up and running and hitting those business metrics, because a lot of that stuff and all the different channels and tactics, they do work. It's just how much time do you have? It's just really how much time do you have, right? If you don't have a lot of time, then you got to prioritize. And also resources, both from a time and a budget perspective, are almost limited. This is every company, even multi-billion-dollar companies I work with, their budgets are limited, believe it or not. Everyone thinks they have unlimited budgets, but they still got to prioritize. And likewise, when we work with mid-sized companies, same as well. And also the conversation a lot of times with these executive and business owners, because they haven't invested a lot before, they want to know, and what we provide is almost like a sustainable growth approach. We don't believe in like the VC approach where you're gonna like, oh yeah, let's just like, spend millions of dollars and hope for the best and just try to burn through the money as quickly as possible and get more money. Well, no, let's do it in an efficient way. Let's get the evidence, let's get the proof that's working, and then we get that buy-in with the leadership team to scale up. And then for them, it's really just a multiplier effect. It's like you got this predictive revenue model. Okay, let's just add more gas to the fire.
Absolutely. I want people to be able to reach you if they feel interested, and I want them to understand exactly what they can get from you. So where can they reach you? Like LinkedIn, website?
Yeah, absolutely. Our website is Strand Consulting, STRAND Consulting, one word, .io. Or on LinkedIn, I'm at /linkedin.com, I think, /Jason Howard So, S in Sierra, O is in October. And yeah, feel free to reach out. I'm always willing to chat with new people and connect with new people.
Amazing. So Jason, this has been an incredible conversation. Your insights on recession-proof marketing, data-driven decision-making, and the smart ways to scale agencies have been eye-opening, and I'm sure everyone listening has learned a lot. So for anyone who wants to learn more about Strand Consulting and Jason's strategic approach, be sure to check him out at strandconsulting.io or connect with Jason on LinkedIn. So Jason, thank you again for sharing your expertise. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks a lot, Kenzie. It's been great as well.
Thank you. Well, thank you everybody for watching.